Did you know Jesus gave a litmus test for how we could identify those of us who say we are his disciples? Did you know Jesus actually said there is a litmus test that if you were looking for his disciples, there is only one way you can identify them. There are not two ways, one way. There's only one way you could identify those who are his disciples. He gave the prescription. He gave the litmus test for identifying them. Now let's look at it and see if you've ever heard of something like this before. Let's look at it. Now, that's in John chapter 13, verse 34 to 35. Look at it. He says, I give you a new commandment, that ye love one another. As I have loved you, you should also love one another. He says, by this all shall know that you are my disciples, if you have love towards one another. I want to read that again. He says, I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. As I have loved you, you should also love one another. By this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if you have love towards one another. That's amazing. Jesus said the only way to identify his disciples is the love they have one for another. One for another. So love is one of the only ways, one and the only way by which we can identify who these disciples are. So the question I want to ask you today is, when you look at the disciples of Jesus Christ today, are you able to tell that we have love one for another, for which we can be identified as disciples or not? Is that what is being said more about being a disciple? What does it mean to be a disciple? Because in this verse, Jesus actually tells us in plain language what it means to be his disciples. He says, if you have love one for the other, by these shall men know that ye are my disciples, when ye will love one another. That's so important. So in the body of Christ today, one of the most important things that is lacking, that we must begin to re-emphasize among us as we build this church community among us, is what? Love. It's not our prayer meetings, it's not our programs, it's not about how much of what we know. It's mostly about what? How we show love for one another. That's so critical. That's so critical. And later we will look at the subject of love on this channel, where we will focus on the love of God, the unconditional love of God, and how that is how God expects us to live among each other. All right? So we'll look at that.